Welcome to the Propanefitness podcast. We are very happy today to be with Dr. Dean St. Mart. I hope I've said that correctly. Dean is a very consistently successful competitive bodybuilder. He's a chemical engineer and he's got an interest in drug design, pharmacology, functional medicine, and basically is just the full package, and someone that I've been very excited to chat to, mainly because I just to nerd out with myself, but there's some really good topics that we wanted to dive into. He has from what I've seen, he's got such a potent bullshit radar that just detects when there's a false claim or there is some kind of misaligned incentive within the fitness and the supplement industry, and I think we'd all agree that there's quite a few of those in the industry. So, Dean, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me on, guys. It's an absolute pleasure.
I liked your shark impression.
That's the
good.
That's the
bullshit.
bullshit.
Was that the bullshit meter? Alright, so I thought you were just doing your shark impression.
I'll have to incorporate that now in future. Bullshit radar alert.
So Yusuf, what am I going to say?
So
Yusuf always does this with podcasts, so he just shows me some notes. And I'm like, oh god, it just says Johnny intro, but the intro's just been done.
Well, okay, so Dean, could you tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words?
Okay, so I live in Ireland, in County Tyrone, with my wife Morgan. As you said, I'm a chemical engineer for Intel, so I work in dry-etch plasma physics.
Bloody hell.
Which is which is interesting in itself. I have a PhD in organic chemistry and fluorescent spectroscopy, and then prior to that I'd done a double honours Bachelor of Science in Chemistry with Pharmaceutical Chemistry in the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, where I came top of the university. So that was where we covered where my interest developed in like drug design, toxicology, pharmacology, all those modules we covered during my degree.
So
and basically, all throughout that period, I was either prior to 2008, I was a kickboxer, so I was big into fitness and training in the gym. And then I actually had an accident kickboxing where I smashed the bones of my right ankle. So that was sort of where I started to, during the rehab, go to the gym a lot more and get into more bodybuilding sort of training. And then after the World Championships in 2010, I decided to pack in kickboxing and move more into bodybuilding.
When you smashed the bones of your ankle, did you smash them on a person?
No.
Okay.
That was a horrible. Actually, when that happened, we were practicing jump spinning kicks. I landed funny in that my people are watching the video. My ankle literally went like that out away from me.
Whoa.
And I just thought it was like a simple sprain, basically. Like I landed awkwardly. I got up and shook it off, but I was limping a little bit. And after like 3 months of physio, it wasn't getting better. And he was like, you need to go see an orthopedic surgeon, I think.
Wow. So it wasn't an immediate like, oh my god, I've broken my ankle. It was a slow realisation.
Yeah, and I mean,
right.
This was one lesson that I learned about medicine also, in that when I went to the orthopedic surgeon with my ankle, I said to him, no, I think it needs surgery. You need to go in with a scope to look at it. And he said to me, oh no, we'll do an MRI first to investigate what's going on, because the x-ray prior to that showed nothing really out of the ordinary, but I knew something wasn't right in my right ankle. So he said, okay, we'll do the MRI and then we'll book you in for the scope surgery the following week. And after the surgery, after review, he took out the MRI and he took out the pictures of my ankle, and he said, you know what, you're 100% right to tell me to go into your ankle. And he showed me the MRI, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with the MRI apart from a little hairline fracture up my tibia. But then he showed me the pictures of inside my ankle, and it was just carnage. There was bits of cartilage floating everywhere. There was the two bones at the ankle joint that clashed off one another and chipped pieces of bone off. He said like it was just carnage. So it goes to show you have a gut feeling that you just go with it.
That's grim. Well, I suppose you must have known about from the pain as well, that, or like the sort of general crunching around you, like something's not right here.
I really, when I was trying to walk, it felt like the two bones wouldn't move. They were sort of locked against one another. So that was like, after that surgery, it was 3 months of physio to get back to a functional ankle, and basically I had to learn how to walk again.
Wow.
What was funny was that was end of 2008, and then the surgery was 2009. And after the surgery, the surgeon actually said to me, like, that's it, you'll never play football, you'll never run, you'll never do kickboxing with what's gone wrong. I sort of like, I'll sort of prove you wrong. And in 2010 I went and I done the World Championships and won that, and then after that I knew I wouldn't have much longevity left with the ankle if I wanted to preserve it, so that sort of forced me out of kickboxing into bodybuilding. So
you won the World Championships after breaking your ankle?
Yeah.
Right.
And you thought, you know what, I better call it a day.
Yeah, that's enough now.
Yeah. I left on a high note, basically.
I think that's quite an important thing to, like, it's very prudent of you to say, actually, I need some longevity, I need to preserve my ankle for the rest of my life. And, you know, I think Johnny and I have had the same realization to some extent with powerlifting, where, so I've prolapsed a disc, my L5S1 is just in tatters, and I just realized that if, maybe you can squeeze out another 6 months or another year of deadlifting on it, but then you've still got to put your socks on in 40 years' time. And so by completely eliminating that possibility, it doesn't exactly... And so, you know, it took me longer than it should have to realise that, hang on, I've lost sensation across the back of my leg, I can't plant or flex my foot, maybe I should stop compressing the disc more and more. But I guess when you're young, especially in your kind of early 20s, you just think that you're invincible and that you should just keep training on it and it'll be fine.
Do you not think that's how most lifting injuries happen, or get as severe as some people? You know, people who end up needing surgery.
Just no pain,
they probably
no
had
gain.
the warning signs 6 months ago, but it's impossibly difficult to make the call yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen powerlifters, and there's a couple of Irish ones who are chronically injured and chronically getting surgeries, and it just comes to a point where you think, what is the benefit or the gain from it? Because as you said, what I'm more so thinking is, like, when I'm 60 or 70, being able to walk properly, I'll still have that plantar flexion on my foot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's fun kickboxing and, you know, intensely training, but later on, when all that's sort of said and done, you're still sort of looking at what's happening further down the line.
Well,
and I guess that sort of applies to then my main message that I often get across on IG about longevity and bodybuilders taking care of their health now in their 20s and 30s, thinking more so of the end game when they're finished with training.
The problem is that especially in characters like yourself, so you've listed your accolades, you've done a lot of stuff at a very high level, you've got a PhD, you work in a very competitive field. All of these things are common traits, I suppose, of being either high achievers or type A personality, or just, at least in powerlifting, the kind of further along the autism spectrum of just dialing down into a spreadsheet and just trying to aim for higher and higher percentages. That as a result, there becomes this blinkered view towards training, and to tell someone, oh, you need to prolong this immediate reward so that you can function in the future, isn't a very sexy prospect. And so I imagine it's a very hard sell, especially with bodybuilders, because they're probably further along that spectrum as well, because there's so much more that's required in terms of a 24-hour input, to be a little bit aware of their own mortality and their prospect for injury.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, the other thing with bodybuilding is internal health you can't see. So if you've got a physical injury externally, it's going to manifest, say, in pain or restricted movement. So you're going to be aware of that. But if you have high blood pressure, you're not looking at the impact that's having on your kidneys, or you're not having an impact on what's happening potentially on the blood flow to your brain or to your heart. And it's sort of then, like, if I can't see it or feel it, then it doesn't exist. And that's sort of why we need to basically make people then aware of, like, certain choices that they may make may manifest then into these side effects, and actually keeping an eye on hidden side effects. And I guess that's more so then where I've been applying more so the background of functional medicine towards bodybuilding, and that when bodybuilders manifest, say for example, symptoms of high blood pressure, well, what is driving that blood pressure? Why do you have that symptom? What is the root cause? Rather than, like, if you go on most of the online forums or, you know, general hearsay, it's that, oh, we'll just take an ACE inhibitor, or we'll take an angiotensin receptor blocker, an A or B blocker, just to keep blood pressure down, when actually, like, their high blood pressure could be because their estrogen is sky high. They're taking too high doses of androgens, so that's affecting the angiotensin hormone regulating cycle of their kidneys.
So
they're retaining more fluids, and so, like, you have to sort of figure out what is driving that issue rather than band-aiding it just to keep you training.
I think this segues us on quite nicely as well, because the way that I found you is somebody sent me a lecture that you did at a bodybuilding convention about drug design and functional medicine, and honestly I found the content fascinating, but I think the sound guys on the day, they'd clearly put the microphone too close to the thing, and there was feedback, and I was like, man, I want to be able to hear this stuff in more detail.
And
but
unfortunately, that video, that was funny. The camera that we used to record, I forgot to turn the microphone on.
Oh man,
we've been there.
So afterwards, I was watching it back. I was like, what's happened to the sound? And then I looked, and I thought, oh my god,
It's been picking up from someone's iPhone at the back.
I was lucky that actually my father was in the audience and he recorded on his phone, so that's why they're sort of like, I had to sync the audio from the phone to the actual camera.
Oh wow,
It's an editor's nightmare. So
it's the worst feeling in the world, I think.
But that's why people were giving out to me saying, like, oh, we tried to watch it but the audio's awful. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, I salvaged what I could.
Yeah.
But still, like if you watch the video, all the slides from the talk are down at the bottom as a picture in pictures, but like even for reading the slides, you don't even have to watch the video. The content is still there.
yeah, exactly. So I was relying on reading the slides, but at least for anyone that's looking for you now, they'll have this on YouTube or iTunes with better audio. But
what you should do, Dean, is have a link at the bottom of the video that just says, want the audio, click here, 50 quid.
Yeah, someone actually said
No problem.
what I should do. I should break it down into mini videos and then do a voice over.
Oh my god.
And then I was like,
At that point, just re-record it.
yeah, I was like, maybe I'll just record it as a lecture series.
Yeah.
That talk, I was the last person to speak on that day, and the amount of people that come up to me afterwards, and I mean, I was talking with some very big names that day, and a lot of people, the general feedback was, oh my god, like, you just opened my eyes to so many different avenues and different ways of thinking at or looking at different problems. And I mean, my background, like I said, is in drug design and pharmacology, in pharmaceutical chemistry, and developing drugs for diseases. But the whole issue I had when I gave that talk was that conventional medicine looks at what drug matches the symptom, whereas functional medicine will actually look then, well, what is the root cause to your problem?
So this is what I found so fascinating, that obviously with conventional medicine, it's treating things once they've got to the point where the blood pressure is imminently causing damage, or it's imminent, you know, it's kind of a last resort thing. And I think a lot of people slate on conventional medicine as if it's bullshit. Well, not bullshit, but as if they don't trust it, and they're sort, you know, I'm sure you've heard all the big pharma actually know the cure for cancer, but they're just hiding it so that they can profit. all these kind of claims. But what I liked about your talk is that you're very much sympathetic to the varying requirements of this, and saying that for the audience of people who are looking to optimize their performance and their health, it makes more sense to look further back along the chain of causality for the high blood pressure. Say, is there some kind of fundamental reason for this that's not the standard pathophysiology, and rather than giving an ACE inhibitor, as you said, is there something that we can do that will kind of stop that chain earlier in its tracks, and will that impact performance, and will that impact longevity as well?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing then that comes from it is, unfortunately, a lot of the population that it's not sexy to have to adopt lifestyle or diet changes to prevent a problem when you know that you could take a simple pill to get rid of a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the same thing, you could take it from the angle of a bodybuilder who's manifesting high blood pressure. Their blood pressure could be being triggered by insulin resistance from using excessive growth hormone. Their high blood pressure could be driven by high estrogen because you're using high levels of androgens. So, like, in the simple case scenario of that particular person, it would be literally reducing their dosage, removing the high level of the compound that is triggering the problem.
So in the high blood pressure example, just to sort of set the person's mind at rest who's listening to this and thinking, well, I go to the gym 4 times a week, am I going to get high blood pressure? That's specifically in non-natural lifting populations,
yeah.
right?
So we're looking at people who are enhanced using either androgenic anabolic steroids or who are using peptide compounds such as growth hormone.
Okay. So they're kind of...
That's to say the general population who goes to the gym who may be non-enhanced or natural, that's where more so the diet, lifestyle and environment factors would apply even greater, because of it's a lot more complex. At least with it, say for an enhanced bodybuilder who develops high blood pressure, there's low-hanging fruit there of, okay, we know compounds are in the system that could be triggering these problems. Let's either reduce them or get rid of them completely.
So,
and then once they're removed, then if high blood pressure is still present, then you're sort of going after, the functional side of diet, lifestyle, environment.
Okay.
that makes sense. So in terms of the low-hanging fruit then, could you talk a bit about the kind of tensions between... So another common criticism I see is someone goes to the doctor for depression and the doctor gives them an SSRI and they say, oh, that's terrible, it's not addressing the root cause of the problem, etc. Now, I know that there's some contention over the data behind SSRIs, and I'm very keen to chat about that as well. But I suppose there's the sense that, yes, the doctor may well know that the patient might actually have several aspects of their lifestyle and their circumstance that need addressing to fundamentally stop that depression. But in a 7-minute window with a patient who isn't motivated and, as you said, just really wants a pill to solve the problem and go away, the doctor, if they were to be glib and say, oh, well, actually, you need to start meditating and walking for an hour a day and go to the gym and sort your marital issues out, and they tell them that in 7 minutes, and the patient's like, all right, and then does none of it, they've not done their job as a doctor to at least mitigate the risk for that patient within that time window. But it's difficult because there's this kind of bilateral tension where even the prescriber of the SSRI may well think, you know what, I'm not super convinced of the evidence here, but this is all I can do in 7 minutes, compared to the populations that we'd be speaking to and who are listening to this podcast who are motivated to actually go back along that causal chain that you said and to start addressing things from a they have the discipline or the willingness to start addressing things from an endogenous perspective.
Yeah, I mean, depression, what triggered my diving into the rabbit hole of depression, I guess, is because it runs familially. So, on my mother's side, there is manic depression. So, even myself, sometimes I can manifest symptoms of low mood and depressive symptoms, but it never really became full-blown in myself. So, in the last couple of years, I started thinking, obviously, as I delved more into functional medicine, surely there is a reason behind why this is manifesting, why depression is happening, whether it's genetically or environmentally or diet-induced, etc. So, the other thing with my own mother was that the clinical psychologist kept increasing her medication, kept giving her higher dosages of medication. We get to a point where it was working but not being as effective, so they'd increase the dosage. So I decided to start delving more so into the fundamental level of looking at my own genetics. And this is where the rabbit hole really opened up. So when 23andMe genetic analysis, and this was 2016. When I was going through all my SNPs, so the single nucleotide polymorphisms, so these are basically parts of genes where a specific sequence has been slightly altered. So the function of the end enzyme that corresponds to that gene may be slightly different to the normal population. So when we look at, for example, mood, we're particularly interested in dopamine, serotonin, and then norepinephrine and epinephrine to a lesser extent. So serotonin gets cleared from the body by an enzyme known as monoamine oxidase A. And it turned out when I delved into my genetics that I actually have a plus variant of MAOA, which means that my MAOA enzyme works 75 times faster than a normal person. So if you can think about the function of MAOA, it's to clear serotonin out of your brain. So if mine's working 75 times faster, it's clearing all that serotonin out. So unless I'm keeping up with the demand for serotonin production, I'm going to end up with low serotonin and effectively low mood. Now, this is where it gets interesting. When you understand that those genetics and why I didn't manifest any symptoms of low mood or low serotonin, if you look at my diet as a bodybuilder, ever since I've been 15, 16, my diet has been extremely high in protein. And I've been feeding my body enough tryptophan to feed into serotonin production. So I never manifest those symptoms of low mood because I'm giving my body the precursor to make serotonin all the time.
Have you ever tested the hypothesis by, or even when you're on holiday or whatever, when you actually haven't got as much access to dietary tryptophan, and noticed any change in your mood?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm the same with sleep, obviously, but again, that was more so where using 5-HTP in the concept of when I developed the sleep stack came from, was to give myself more serotonin to fall asleep and feed into the next day's mood, basically. The other then, so what I came to realise there obviously was that, okay, I have MAOA++. So obviously then, without even testing my mother, it must be either maternal or paternal where I got those genetics from. So then you start to get a picture of, okay, so my mother is MAOA++, obviously, because of the manic depressive symptoms. Then when you delve further down the line into the cytochrome P450 enzymes, so those enzymes are hepatic expressed enzymes which metabolize drugs. And when you look then into the polymorphisms I have in CYP450s, you start to see, oh, there's one there in, I think it's 3A1C, I think it is. And what that controls is the metabolism of SSRIs. So now you start to see, okay, so my mother here has MAOA++, and she also has possibly polymorphisms in CYP450, 3A1. So now it makes sense why her dosage of prescribed medication keeps going up and up, because of she's a super metabolizer of the compound.
That's unlucky to also be a super metabolizer of SSRIs as well. So
yeah, so like then you start to build a picture there that, okay, now I know sort of an underlying root cause of why I may have low mood, and I also know now why the doctor keeps prescribing higher medication. But the issue here then, when you go back to conventional medicine, is that if you were to quiz any sort of doctor on that simple biochemistry, they're clueless, unfortunately, like to put it simply.
So yeah, it's a kind of difficulty with misaligned incentives, where if you were to go to your psychiatrist and say, I would like an MAOI inhibitor, they would probably say, the problem is I can't prescribe this because it's a third line or fourth line treatment and it's not in the guidelines anymore, and so as a result I can't bear the litigation risk of prescribing this, I suppose. So then you're in the position where either you go to America where they'll just give you whatever you pay them for,
So what does that mean, that that wouldn't be the first option?
Yeah, so it would be like, because there are other side effects and risks with taking them.
Right.
The doctor then can't legally justify giving that drug because it's...
So they default to SSRIs as the...
But then again, if someone had MAOA, why would you not go back then to the fundamental aspect of how serotonin's produced and quiz them on diet, quiz them on lifestyle? How much protein are they eating per day? Are they adequately hitting what their body requires for tryptophan to produce serotonin? Rather than looking at blocking MAOA to keep what serotonin is there, actually ensure that they are constantly feeding into serotonin synthesis, so whether it's either high protein diet or helping with 5-HTP and conversion through to serotonin.
So in this situation, what I think you're describing is basically there's this almost genetic canvas where someone has a makeup that means they're more likely to experience low moods or depressive symptoms. Is the takeaway then eat more protein in that instance? Or like, is there anything you can do about that, or is it just that's the way it's written, there's very little you can do to avoid it?
I guess then it can get a little more technical in that just because you have sufficient levels of neurotransmitters, we delved into neuropharmacology during my degree, and having sufficient levels of neurotransmitters is one part of the puzzle. The second part is actually then having sensitivity at the synapse to actually take on board those neurotransmitters. So whilst you may have adequate levels of neurotransmitters, you may have deficiencies then at the synapse to actually take on board the neurotransmitter to elicit its effect. And that's where it gets a little more technical then of delving into what is happening then on a molecular level. But yeah, of course, making sure that we hit tryptophan and tyrosine targets. So tryptophan feeds into serotonin, tyrosine feeds into dopamine.
So these are ways that you can, like with the background of your genetic predispositions, you can then say, I'm going to try and stack the odds back in my favour with the interventions that I can control. So it's not like it's a cure necessarily, but it's like it's how can you sort of protect against each of those weaknesses or factors.
Yeah, and understanding fundamentally what your body is requiring to keep up with its demand. Then you have the other side that I delved into in that talk at Irish Muscle Power, and that was about depression as a symptom rather than a root cause. So you're best off, if someone has depressive symptoms, there must be something that is triggering that depression. And like we went on before when we were discussing about the blood pressure, it's about going back like I did to actually seeing where that root cause is stemming from. And what they are starting to see is that a lot of people may potentially be chronically inflamed. And as a result, that inflammation is triggering depressive symptoms within the brain. As a way of, you can't, unlike a physical injury where you get a cut and white blood cells flood to the area and trigger inflammation and apparent healing, if you have an underlying inflammatory condition, say within your liver or within your gut, you have no real way of assessing what's happening there. So what they're starting to see is potentially underlying inflammation in the body is triggering depression as a way of to alert your brain to something isn't right within my body.
So
there's a couple of nice books if people want to delve into it. There's Dr. Kelly Brogan's book A Mind of Your Own, and there's another one called An Inflamed Mind that's written, I forget his name now, he's a clinical psychologist in the UK, and they both come at it from the angle of inflammation in the brain and viewing depression as a symptom to a root cause.
I've been following a little bit from a guy called Datis Karazian, who's a neurologist in America, Harvard neurologist. Yeah, and he's I mean that's also one part of his kind of hypotheses that there are either systemic inflammatory issues that are kind of on a low level and wouldn't be picked up because they're not above the clinical reference range necessarily, but they will be kind of an ongoing thing, and that there are maybe things that we can do to either improve parasympathetic tone or reduce these inflammatory contributors that will then help to sort of dampen those symptoms a little bit.
So that's inflammation's a term that's thrown around a lot, right? I feel like especially in the online fitness world, which is what most people listening will be familiar with, people say, "Oh, I've got gut inflammation," or I'm very inflamed today, and things like that. Can you, either of you, give a very concise, like what is that? As far as I've got no idea what that is. What could be causing inflammation, or what is inflammation in that context?
I guess that is a tricky one to answer quite simply, but if someone was concerned that they had chronic levels of inflammation, we can measure this through blood markers.
Right. Okay.
So we have HSCRP, which is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So that's produced in the liver in response to high levels of cytokines. So cytokines are like messenger molecules that are sent out by our white blood cells to respond to either a pathogen or an inflammatory event. So when our body produces, one of the main ones is IL-6, or people might know about TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha. When they reach the liver, they get processed and they trigger C-reactive protein. And C-reactive protein is part of the complement system. So again, that's one of our immune responses for combating innate infection. So if someone had chronic levels of inflammation, you'd be able to detect it through HSCRP.
So, and to answer the question of what is it? What's the initial thing? Is that if there is some kind of low level insult to the immune system,
okay,
and then it starts to go on like a yellow alert.
Right.
So not like red alert enough to actually mount an immune response, but enough to just be slightly activated and start to release things that will either cause a seeping of fluid out of the blood vessels and low levels of effect on the way that the way that the gut functions, the way that the nervous system operates. So it might slightly elevate your cortisol to bring up your blood glucose and your catecholamines. All of these things start to you become slightly more tinted in favor of, say, fight flight, even if it's not enough to affect something at a conscious level. It might affect some of the internal workings of the organs and then just cause things not to function quite as well. And I think for the context of bodybuilding or whatever, we don't want that to be the case, because it's kind of quite counter to
what we're trying
protein
to do.
synthesis, for example. Yeah.
So could someone who feels otherwise well be sat there? So someone is sitting there with low mood, for example, or depressive symptoms. Could they have no symptoms of chronic inflammation otherwise, but that be the case?
Yeah, and I'll tell you where one hidden point of it is, and I guarantee you most people have this.
Okay. This is the big secret.
Gums.
Gums.
Inflamed gums. How many people go and get their gums deep cleaned once a year by their dentist? Or been to their dentist in the last 2 years? Or floss, or use interdental toothbrushes to brush their gums?
Flossing is that one habit that I think all of humanity are like, oh yeah, I really should floss. I'll do it tomorrow, and just never get around to it.
But you know why? Like there's no one offering a sufficient concise explanation as to why.
Here we go.
Here it is.
Because
you're inflamed.
Like, if there's any one thing that you can do to preserve keeping low levels of inflammation in your body is taking care of your teeth and your gums.
That is insane.
Again, when you look at it, then high levels of inflammation will not only feed into depression, they may feed into arterial oxidation of LDL. So now you have your immune system on alert, looking for LDL. So you have white blood cells, the macrophages, the little Pac-Men, going around and looking for LDL to eat. And they generate the foam cells, which are like a sticky sort of molecule now that can actually adhere to the inside your endothelium to generate a plaque. So if there's anything that you can do to keep inflammation low in your body, the first step is take care of your teeth. That's an easy thing that anyone can do.
That's a great takeaway as well.
I can't believe it's come down to that. But okay, so eat more protein and brush your teeth.
invest in a good quality electric toothbrush. Floss daily. Once a week, use interdental toothbrushes to actually brush within your gums.
Those are the little sticks with the handle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll actually be able to clean your gum basically because of the bristles. Because it's literally a piece of floss that has the bristles. And then use a mouthwash. Obviously, then you could come at it from the side of then, you're going to be exposed to fluoride if you're using fluoride-containing toothpaste. But then it's quite simple. Don't use fluoride-containing toothpaste.
What's your concern with fluoride?
I suppose if you look deeply into it, you're then competing with iodine in the body, which then feeds off into the thyroid, or you may end up with, again, this is all conspiracy theories and, with the papers in terms of calcifying your pineal gland.
Yeah, so this was the one that I've seen some stuff on about calcifying the pineal gland, and the problem is very much so. I did a feature about sleeping on the floor recently because there was some hypotheses that tribesmen and indigenous populations sleep on hard surfaces and have lower levels of musculoskeletal illness. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. But anyone I could find that was an advocate of it were just really weird, and I didn't trust them. And the same with the pineal gland thing as well. That I think they discredit themselves by being so systemically weird that it kind of. But it's tough because whenever I've asked a dentist about whether they're concerned about that, it's not something they've heard of, and obviously they're just saying, well, no, you absolutely should use a fluoridated toothpaste because of the dental health. So I'd love to see if there's some data that comes out in the future that can talk about this, because if it is the case and we are calcifying our pineal gland from toothpaste, then that's for those of us who meditate or are interested in that that side of our personal growth, it's a huge hindrance.
What does your pineal gland do?
It's the basically like the spiritual center of the brain.
Wow. Okay.
According to what they according to the conspiracy theorists, but it also produces melatonin. So there's the idea that as you grow older, your sleep quality declines
because of calcification.
Possibly.
So dentists say use it, but there's a theory to suggest that we maybe shouldn't.
The dentists are all just lizards trying to control our minds. So.
There is a published study regarding fluoride's effect on sex hormone binding globulin. Increasing sex hormone binding globulin.
For goodness sake.
Again, the picture for why fluorine is in our water and why we're prescribed to use it isn't very convincing. But again, like I said, you're then delving into conspiracy theories.
Well, it's just the government's trying to control the population, isn't it? So, obviously.
So
it's up to people to develop their own conspiracy theories and beliefs.
Just to for the listeners as well, sex hormone binding globulin is what basically sweeps up your testosterone in your blood, and so it inactivates it. And in my recent estrogen test, my sex hormone binding globulin was quite high.
Because of all the toothpaste.
All the toothpaste must be.
Stop brushing your teeth.
I mean, even drinking water, like again, trying to remove fluorine from tap water is very, very difficult without doing reverse osmosis, where you extract the ions out of water. Most generic, water filters that you buy, Brita filters or whatever brand, they will just remove, because it's activated charcoal-based filters. They don't actually remove fluorine from it because of how heavy the fluorine molecule is. So again, that's where possibly moving to bottled water could be better, but then you're getting into the argument of bottled water and plastic, and then where'd you go from there? So it's
a horrible rabbit hole. It's absolutely and when even if you try and find BPA free bottles, we know that BPC and the other alternatives to BPA are just as estrogenic, if not more. Do you think there's someone
somewhere in the centre of all this that knows what's going on and is to blame for all these things?
Let's go find him, beat him up.
Because it seems like just this game that cannot be won.
It's terrible.
It is terrible when you start to think of it that way. It really is terrible. It doesn't matter what choice you make at the end of it.
You just fucked.
There's some sort of outlier that's gonna fuck you either way.
Yeah, it's so.
So just try and be happy and get on with it.
I mean,
just accept your fate.
So I've been doing an estrogen experiment recently where, having spoken to Anthony J, I eliminated a lot of estrogens from my environment and from my cosmetics and that kind of thing. And finding alternatives that are completely estrogen free is the closest thing to impossible that I've ever done. It's like you find something that's paraben free and instead it's laden with phthalates. You find something that's phthalate free, it's got loads of parabens and sodium benzoate and sodium lauryl sulfate, and you're like, okay, fine, I'll go for the plant-based alternative. And the only plant-based ones are flax or lavender, and you're like, this is a joke. It's as if they're all playing some.
That's why I think there's a man in the centre of it all that knows what's going on. That's rigged the game, so it cannot be won. It's just like a big maze with no exit.
It'll be Unilever. Like I bet they own all of the. You know how like they give you the false sense of choice by how they own like
by owning all the brands.
They have Imperial Leather and Johnson & Johnson and all this stuff, and then they say, oh well, it's a different product. So, but actually they own all of like the ethical superstore.
This is
soaps.
We're getting into what Yusuf does when he's on his own in a dark room.
I mean, then it comes down to like the underlying thing of, well, you shouldn't smell. If everything is fine, sweat is odorless. So when you're washing yourself using plain water, it should really be sufficient.
So
when you go back to the underlying thing of how clean your body is, basically.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is internally, not like shower gel is causing us to smell, because you've heard the no poo movement. People that don't use shampoo because they say when you use shampoo it rinses off the oils, which causes you to then have oilier hair the next day, and then you have to keep using it more and more. Right. But anyway, it's
all part of the grand conspiracy, isn't it?
Before we go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, Dean, what are the implications that you've drawn from the kind of extensive stuff that you've done on training for hypertrophy or eating for hypertrophy?
For natural lifters?
Yeah, so are there any differences in the implications, I suppose, for drug-free versus drug-assisted lifters?
I mean, I guess when it comes to an enhanced bodybuilder, they have the advantages in that certain compounds will increase nitrogen retention. So ultimately, for protein synthesis to actually accrue muscle tissue, we must finish that day with a positive nitrogen balance, to put it simply. So basically, if we get down to the nitty gritty, to put on say a pound of muscle tissue at the end of a month, so that's 440 grams of muscle tissue. If you divide that by 30, it'll give you something like, I think it's 8 grams of protein retention per day, in order to accrue a pound of muscle tissue. And that positive nitrogen retention then is upregulated in the context of, increased mTOR activation using anabolic steroids. A natural athlete won't have that advantage per se, because of obviously they're relying on free testosterone within their body and the natural hormone cascades, having optimal levels of free T3 for their thyroid hormone to keep their metabolism optimized. So I guess a enhanced bodybuilder may get away with being able to ingest more protein that would be deemed necessary to take advantage of that increased nitrogen retention, whereas a natural athlete may have to be a little more intelligent in terms of their obeying their caloric balance. So again, obviously we know that there's a higher thermic effect of food with protein, and it's very difficult to overfeed on protein, but it just doesn't make sense then for a natural athlete to be shoveling in tons of protein when they could actually, designate some of that caloric intake to carbohydrates and fats.
I see. So
towards their overall calorie intake then.
So I suppose like with drug enhanced lifters, that you can afford to take the piss a lot more with a lot of the variables. So you take the piss with protein, you take the piss with training volume and frequency, and I suppose in Mark Key's words, like you can afford to make a lot more training errors and still make progress because of this cascade that's just been this kind of pushing you.
You'll have increased recovery, better insulin sensitivity, possibly better control of thyroid hormone metabolism. So again, you can't. That's where you see people who choose to go the route of enhancement, making such great gains initially, even though everything may not be optimized, because you're going from this sort of field to up here. Whereas again, if you get to here, well, what's stopping you coming up here with keeping everything properly optimized? And that's where you see the dramatic, real gains. But again, natural athletes, the whole issue behind enhanced athletes also is the young generation just hopping on it without gaining a fundamental understanding of training and diet, and then obviously optimizing their recovery. It's almost seen as, oh, if I take steroids, I'm going to get massive very quickly. Whereas the basis there should be that, you know, you should be able to understand methods, training intensities, proper rest and recovery, and then obviously being able to keep full control of your diet.
There are people we've seen who use steroids as a way to offset the things that are lacking in their lifestyle. So they're out late most nights, they're taking a lot of cocaine, they're doing a lot of stuff that is normally would put them into bad shape, and so the steroids almost just mitigate that and just bring them back to normal again, which I think is a very sledgehammer way to just look into normal shape.
We've seen people who are taking a lot of drugs who outwardly don't even look like they train, which I just find
heartbreaking.
Well, it's also like bizarre how you've managed to achieve that.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's a hell of a thing, isn't it?
I remember you saying, if I was taking steroids, I would be in hospital with how...
Just the training volume.
Yeah. That you just absolutely nailed
if you've got that ability to train more, but you're not training at all, what a waste of time. But anyway.
I mean, it comes back to, like I said, having like that discipline of learning training intensity. So, like, if you're natural and you know that you've optimized your training, and say, for example, like you get absolutely fucked doing a widowmaker on squats, but say you aim for, you know, that 20 rep set, but it takes you, like, say you get to rep 12 or 13 and you're having to grind out the last 7. When you're enhanced, that widowmaker may seem a lot more effortless, and then you can follow up with more volume following that widowmaker because of the recovery capacity there.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
It sounds scary, to be honest, because like I suppose the stress is the same on joints, ligaments, tendons, but something's shifted that means that you're able to suddenly handle that weight when no other structures are ready for it.
Yeah, and then you get into the whole issue of certain anabolic steroids increasing calcium and sodium absorption, so then you have protected joints that can handle heavier loads, yet the tendon and ligaments don't actually strengthen when using these compounds, and that's where we start to see devastating injuries from overconfidence.
So for someone who's not enhanced, is there anything that you've come across, or any changes from what is maybe the norm that someone should or shouldn't be doing? Or does it just come back to, as you say, like monitoring your protein intake in line with your calorie intake and not overdoing training stress and calories?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really any hidden secret, I guess, to a natural athlete other than being just meticulous and tracking everything and understanding what variable then is lacking. There's no, like, hidden way to make gains. How you are training, and then what you're doing following that training that is improvement. Because I think I posted recently a picture between the very first time I ever competed in bodybuilding in 2011 to like 2 weeks ago. And when you work out all the hours between the two, I think it was like 68,000 hours in 7.5 years. But like we worked out that, say I trained an hour every day, 5 days a week for the last 7.5 years, it only comes out at 2,000 hours. It's like, that's 2,000 hours physically training in the gym, and then, 65,000 hours living my life. Training is one piece of the puzzle that you need to nail in terms of intensity and, inducing change to cause muscle tissue. But it goes with it, what you do following that training in terms of your nutrition, and that'd be the best advice for someone who.
Dean, we're losing you a little bit on the connection. Can you just repeat that last bit?
Basically, for a natural person, you're looking at nailing them their nutrition and being meticulous in that regard. In our training versus.
So just to, because it's as if the gods of gains are like the number one secret to.
He's revealing it now.
So you were saying that it's to nail recovery and the time outside of the gym so that you can recover from the time that you're training as a natural athlete. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, being able to take it to that level that's going to cause adaptation rather than, going into the gym and swinging. For example, biceps. How many people do you see train biceps effectively who could be potentially natural?
Not many.
I know people swinging dumbbells like this up where it could be mainly glenohumeral joint of their shoulder that's taking most of the load. When in fact, if they actually, adducted their shoulder, kept their elbow in line with their body, and actually worked off the mechanics of their bicep and actually lifting a correct load, you'd see someone go from swinging a 5 kilo dumbbell like this to probably not being able to do 12 reps with a 5 kilo dumbbell.
It's funny because a lot of the problems just get pulled back to something that's actually it's like
really simple.
Just train your biceps properly. It's and we see this a lot with, we call it the syndrome of thinking you're more advanced than you are, and we have a lot of people that come to us worrying about stuff that's really minutiae when they just haven't got they're not making it to the gym more than once, twice a week, or that their calories are all over the place, and you're thinking, well, okay, let's get them sorted, then we'll start worrying about.
Well, an error I constantly see is someone's in the gym and it's upper body day, so they just sporadically pick 3 or 4 exercises and do a few sets with them, and then
just a random assortment.
They maybe don't do those exercises again for 8 weeks when they randomly fancy it, and am I making progress? Well, I don't know. Do I look any different in the mirror? Maybe.
Yeah.
It's just chaotic.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, that's where the beauty of a logbook.
Yeah.
I encourage anyone to have, and basically then you have a written record of what you need to effectively beat session to set.
Yeah.
So whether that's, get one extra rep or increase 1.5 reps, and then you get into this, progressive overload that you are constantly progressing your body to adapt to a better stimulus.
Yeah. And it's what turns the 9th rep of your 3rd set into something really significant rather than something really random. And it actually, it becomes competitive and there's a structure, but it's, again, probably much simpler than what most people are trying to do. You're just focusing on correct technique and just have a simple plan that's progressive and you follow it. Okay, so it's good to know that there's no hidden secrets that we weren't aware of. So, that you're aware of. Okay, so moving on to, I suppose, a bit more of your specialty, I suppose, in the world of supplements. So again, just keeping it in the non-enhanced realm, what are some of the do's and don'ts that you would advocate with supplements? Are there any supplements out there that are popular that you think are maybe a bad idea? One to touch on is specifically beta-alanine. Yusuf has a theory that, I'll let you speak more about it, but beta-alanine's in most pre-workouts, for example, SIRS, citrulline malate, and a lot of BCAAs. But I know there's a lot of stuff that, you know, Yusuf will send me a text saying like, Johnny, stop taking BCAAs immediately. It's not quite that serious, but you know, there's an overwhelming tide of these are the things that we should be taking. This is what's in pre-workout. But then when you dig a little deeper, there's sometimes some contradictory evidence. So is there anything that you're looking at currently, or opinions you have that maybe differ from the market norms at the moment?
I guess the simplest thing that someone possibly could incorporate pre-workout or intra-workout is a complete protein source. So whether that's from the pre-workout meal, or whether that is supplementing with something like whey protein hydrolyzate or a essential amino acid supplement.
Right.
That's the first thing, so that you're augmenting muscle protein synthesis going into the workout, and then obviously supporting that during the 2 or 3 hours pre and post training. Then you're sort of getting more into the technical aspect of, okay, do I need to support enos, the enzyme which creates nitric oxide in the body? So obviously, the more nitric oxide, the greater vasodilation. In theory, the greater blood flow and nutrient delivery you are going to get to that muscle tissue whilst training. So then you're getting into the nitty gritty of, okay, beta alanine feed into carnosine synthesis along with citrulline helping with enos to create nitric oxide. Are they fundamental and required? No. Will they make a difference? Potentially. Like if we know that taking beta alanine will later feed into carnosine and then feed into muscular endurance, then you're sort of getting to the nitty gritty of, if I didn't take it and I get to that final rep, if I did take it, would the muscular endurance be there to, you know, get past that lactate threshold? So I don't think any of these things are necessary in terms of, you know, what supplements I need to take. It's again going back to the basics of, am I supporting my body to recover before the workout and after the workout through my nutrition first?
On a high level as well, do you think there are any kind of misaligned incentives with supplements that are that there, when there's research that's come out on it? So I remember there was that one on I think it was HMB that just made it out to be this absolutely incredible, people gained like 12 pounds of muscle in 12 weeks or something, and then later on it was discredited and the author was found to not have declared his interests and all of that stuff. Are there any kind of systemic issues within the research that you think we haven't spotted, or do you think there are certain supplements that have been overblown as a result of data that's just not been questioned?
I suppose that is one thing that you always need to, in any sort of form of research, whether it is even like pharmaceuticals, who is doing the research and who is funding it? Where are the outside special interests? Like if this company developed this super amazing anabolic compound, yet the people who studied it and published the paper are actually being paid, you know, a couple of $100,000 to study their compound, to skew the results, to manipulate the statistics, to then falsify what actually happens. Because then you end up with looking at results that may be significant, but then when you take into consideration the sample size study, it becomes clinically insignificant. Yeah, you could, you know, make this claim on your product that this product, you know, is 5 times more anabolic than
500% more, yeah.
Yeah, or 500. What was the claim? What supplement was it that they put 5,000%? I think it might have been one of the creatine, one of the new forms of creatine.
Okay.
One of the papers, they made some outrageous claim. I was like, 5,000% more absorption or something. I was like, how do you even physically achieve that, or even, you know, scientifically quantify that number?
It's interesting because even the most, what appears to be statistically sophisticated methods can be p-hacked, I suppose, where p is the probability that the results have come out by chance. And there was one I saw recently, someone took apart this old study that people had just been relying on as one of these great scientific mysteries, which was someone made they did something to make water and stuff dissolved in it crystallize in certain shapes, and then took photos of it macroscopically, and in one group he emanated positive emotion towards one crystal and said certain like good words, and then the other group he said bad words and emanated negative emotion, and the crystals looked in different shapes, and the not positive ones would look really nice symmetrical ones, and the negative were like these horrible sort of brown mottled crystals. And someone just took it apart and was like, what this guy has done is just a really sophisticated way to make it, to like cherry pick his results, and it sent a lot of people along this track of like, maybe there are these vibrations that are responsive to emotion and they get picked up within physical matter, and it just completely sends the science off on a track that it is fruitless.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you can sort of apply that the current supplement industry towards, say, the selective androgen receptor modulators.
So yeah, we were just talking about this before the call. I'd love to hear you pick these apart.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, so like I gave a lecture on these in 2008, and back then you had the typical compounds you see today, like S4, androgen, ostarine. Basically,
can we just give people an intro? Sorry, for anyone who doesn't know what the androgen modulators are.
Yeah, so to make it quite simple, what elicits the effects of, say, anabolic steroids is that we have androgen receptors in the body, and they basically then dictate through gene activation whether we get, the anabolic effects of muscle building, protein synthesis, etc., or whether we develop the androgenic side effects. So they could be, all DHD conversion, the prostate enlargement side effects. So when we take certain compounds, we can favour towards how they bind to the androgen receptor to elicit either an anabolic effect or a androgenic side effect. And how they done this quite simply back in like the 60s and 70s when they were developing the classes of compounds, was they'd use the levator ani muscle of a rat and expose it to the and then expose it to the rat, the rat to the compound, and see what happens. So whether
the muscle that lifts your anus.
or whether then did it cause the prostate tissue of the rat then to grow in size also, and they were able to get a ratio between the growth of the muscle versus the growth of the prostate, and that's where you develop then the androgenic to anabolic ratios we see for these compounds.
Okay.
But obviously there will always be some level of androgenicity to these compounds versus the anabolic effects. So if we're looking at purely developing compounds that could possibly, say, combat sarcopenia, so muscle wasting in advanced older age generations, we'd want a compound that is going to cause androgenic side effects, so that we're putting them at risk, say, of benign prostate hyperplasia.
Yeah, in a population that already have big prostates, you don't want to do anything to make that worse.
Again. So basically, we want to develop a class of compounds that will be selective for the androgen receptor, but will only cause the anabolic effects. And that's where the research stems then for this class of molecules called the selective androgen receptor modulators. But the companies that went into that research, Merck and a couple of others, after about 5 years, androgen S4 is probably the compound which has made it the furthest in terms of getting to almost phase 3 clinical trials for humans. But they started to realise that, okay, they do activate the androgen receptor and they can cause anabolic effects, but they're still causing some mild androgenic side effects. The other research of why they wanted to develop them was so that they'd act specifically the androgen receptor and not feed back to the HPTA. So the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis is what controls the output of LH and FSH, are two fertility hormones that feeds back down onto the testes to make testosterone. So if we can keep that system functioning whilst giving this anabolic agent, then we don't have to worry about withdrawal when we take the compound away. And that's the side effects. You can have a whole other discussion with anabolic steroids causing HPTA shutdown and cease of natural function. So the SARMs came along so that we have this super molecule that's going to only activate your androgen receptors and not feed back to the hypothalamus to cause HPTA shutdown. The unfortunate thing is then you get supplement companies, because they are research compounds to speak, there is no regulation behind them because they aren't classified compounds. They have no pharmaceutical regulation in terms of being, a declared substance. So now you have companies that can actually get external chemical companies to manufacture this molecule, because obviously the research is published on how to synthesize the molecules, or you have clever chemists who can, take the molecule apart and see, okay, this is how we make it quite easily. And then you get them to batch produce the compound, and then it ends up falling onto the supplement market as this, fool's gold of you're going to get all these gains without HPTA shutdown. The research then, obviously we see effects down in rats, so a lot of them have been studied in rats, obviously to understand the anabolic and androgenic side effects. We then get people, the simple calculation for a rat and a mouse, I think, is you multiply the dose by 6. So whatever it is in a rat milligram per kilogram, you multiply by 6 and it gives you the equivalent human dose. You then get people thinking that, okay, well, if that was the effective dose in rats, we now have the effective dose in humans. They start to apply the same logic like anabolic steroids, and, well, more is obviously going to be better. And then we start to see then that, one of the newest classes of SARM, which was developed, I think, in 2014, is that YK11. And we start to see proper HPTA shutdown when that is used in high doses. So we can start to see that there is a negative feedback occurring, whether it's being caused by increased estrogen from aromatization, or whether it's actually feeding back onto the hypothalamus itself effectively. They are just uncontrolled substances that have side effects, and again are ultimately a unknown venture when you decide to go down that path. If you're going to go into enhanced routes, thinking that these are going to preserve my natural function, and I've seen plenty of blood work to suggest that these compounds are HPTA suppressive.
That's so interesting. So actually,
you need to actually be more wary when you go down this avenue of using a uncontrolled substance being produced in some pharmaceutical company.
So I guess quality control issues, the fact that the claims don't match up in vivo, the fact that if you're taking this stuff and then you do have shutdown, you've then got to go and presumably either fix it yourself, approach an endocrinologist, by which point you've gone so far down this niche level of things where it may not even be a standard compound and they might have no experience at all with it, that you've caused yourself possibly an irreversible problem with your HPTA axis.
Yeah, I mean, the same concept would apply to these compounds in terms of if you were suppressed towards a post-cycle therapy. But again, just because something is in a supplement being able to be bought online or off the shelf in a supplement store does not mean that it's of the same regulation or control as a pharmaceutically prepared compound, or it's on par then to someone making underground steroid compounds in their backyard.
Because it hasn't gone through those rigorous processes that a pharmaceutical approved regulated substance would be. Both in terms of the testing on people, but also in the follow-ups and all, and the side effects logging and all of that stuff, but also just the actual quality control of the substance itself.
Yeah, and I mean, and a lot of the research regarding SARMs is purely anecdotal. testosterone and adrenaline did make it to almost phase 3. So we have some human data from phase 2. But again, it's more so of a gamble versus the truly well-studied anabolic steroids that have been around the last 50 years.
So is there anything that someone can do as a natural lifter to upregulate their androgen receptors or to activate them more naturally? And I realise training is probably one of the biggest stimuli for this, but I've seen something about carnitine and improving the androgen receptor density. Is that something that's reliable, or is that something that's going to be significant enough to have an effect on human muscle growth?
Potentially. Again, that's another fool's gold in terms of natural testosterone booster supplements. The molecule you're specifically talking about is carnitine L-tartrate. So, as far as I can remember from the research, when they gave that, they seen a direct correlation in androgen receptor upregulation. But if you increase the density of androgen receptors in the body, it does not mean that you're going to have the hormone level to actually activate those androgen receptors themselves anyway. So just because you have more receptors doesn't mean you have more anabolic effects, because you need more free hormone to activate those receptors.
I see.
There was an interesting paper around a natural herb called shilajit, and there's a research paper from 2016 or 17, I think, and it increased free testosterone by 45%, I think was the number in the paper. In a double-blind experiment with, I think, 40 people. So if people want to search up on PubMed, they can read into it. But again, it's very hit or miss with these natural testosterone boosters. Again, as not a fool's gold, but like a hidden promise of, this is going to guarantee you to get gains. So again, I'm going to take this natural testosterone booster and it's going to give me, massive anabolic effects when my training and diet is poor.
I'm just not sure they're any safer than the engineered compounds as well, because you've then got the variance within when it's picked in the year and what part of the plant is used and all of these kind of things, and the number of other hundreds of compounds within a herb that I always wonder.
With shilajit, the active compound they found to induce the increase in free testosterone is fulvic acid. So you can look for a standardized shilajit compound with, a percentage of fulvic acid. But again, anecdotally, and speaking to people who have asked me and I've, recommended, here's a piece of research, it's up to you if you want to follow it. The results from it haven't been
replicated. So on the fulvic acid note, there's a drug called fulvestrant which I've been looking into recently, and I asked Dr. J about this, the estrogen guy, what he thought about SARMs, which are selective estrogen reuptake modulators, and these kind of down-regulate the receptors for estrogen in the body, thereby reducing the effect that estrogen would have on your body and on your muscle tissues eventually. But what he said was that if you take that, you end up with an upregulation on the other side. So actually, once you come off them, you might have caused yourself more of a problem, or like either an increase in the density of receptors overall, or an increase in the amount that you aromatize or estrogen that you produce. There's a new class of drugs called SERDs, selective estrogen reuptake destroyers, which just destroy the estrogen receptor entirely. And it seems to have been used by some experimental bodybuilders, but I guess it's been made for people who have got breast cancer. But I suppose the problem is it's very experimental, and if you take it, then you're just going to permanently have high blood levels of estrogen that just aren't being picked up by the receptor. Is that something that you've looked into at all?
No, I hasn't. No, that's very interesting. But again, the whole topic of estrogen with bodybuilders, it gets dogged to death. What most people fail to realize is that you need estrogen to activate the androgen receptor, so you need estrogen for muscle growth. You also need estrogen to ensure that hepatic lipase levels are kept down within your liver, and that augments then onto HDL synthesis. So all of these enhanced bodybuilders that use, high doses of aromatase inhibitors to block conversion of testosterone to estrogen, to keep estrogen low in the body, because we don't want estrogen, because of excessive levels of estrogen will cause gynecomastia or fat gain, etc. You actually need those healthy levels of estrogen to ensure that your liver is processing cholesterol molecules correctly.
So by playing God, we might end up going too far the other way, or messing with unintended consequences of cholesterol metabolism and so on.
Yeah, I mean, like when you think about it, I'll have to read into this now. This sounds very interesting. But then you have, you have the estrogen receptor alpha and the estrogen receptor beta, and both of those then have their own, downstream effects of what they cause in terms of gene transcription. So are you effectively going to end up then with more alpha receptors versus beta receptors? Are you destroying them all?
It seems like we don't know enough. Yeah, and then also with the environmental ones on top, is that going to be blocked by these drugs, or is it working through a different? Because I know they're not excreted the same way, and so yeah, to me it seems like such a rabbit hole and such a complex set of things that I wouldn't really know where to start if I was to try and pharmacologically alter these different processes.
Yeah, and again, the other thing with estrogen speak is how many people actually support the liver metabolism of beta estradiol in terms of how it gets excreted from the body through phase 2 conjugation, and taking care of the liver processes, etc. Like killing estrogen, again, this is if you look at it from the functional approach and the conventional approach. Conventional approach would be, let's kill off aromatase so that we don't get conversion of estrogen, or let's block off the estrogen receptors so that we don't end up with a side effect from estrogen receptor activation. Whereas the functional side would be more so looking at, okay, why are you manifesting high estrogen, or what can we do to eliminate excessive estrogen from the body? What enzyme do we need to support? What process do we need to support? It's again, I suppose it's taking a sledgehammer to something by throwing an aromatase inhibitor, or taking this receptor disruptor straight off the bat, because then you'll end up with bodybuilders thinking, pre-contest time, I don't want estrogen in my body for water retention, so let's take this compound that's going to destroy all these receptors, so there's absolutely no chance I'm going to get any estrogen side effects. And then they start to encounter possibly libido issues, because they start realizing, post-competition, half these receptors are destroyed, and that you actually need estrogen receptor activation for a healthy libido.
It's a very irreversible thing as well. Like, once you've destroyed all the receptors, it's like, what do you do? It's
yeah. And then the other thing is, like, does it destroy the receptor but still leave the gene intact, so that when the receptors are destroyed, you can still get gene transcription to generate estrogen receptors? Like, that's the whole side effect of when someone takes a super physiological level of androgens, they get to a point where the effective dose that they're taking is no longer effective, because of you get androgen receptor downregulation, so that the levels of androgen receptors being expressed on muscle tissue reaches a saturation point. And at that point, you're sort of looking at someone to either push the dose even higher to try and induce a compensatory gene transcription to make more androgen receptors to cope with this flood of higher levels, or you remove that high level stimulation to allow the gene then to stop being halted to return to normal transcription.
Yeah. So I guess the take home point from all of these downstream effects is that once you step into the realm of bleeding edge modifications of your hormonal processes and receptors and all these things, there's not really much stepping back, and the further the more experimental you go, the less reversible the process is, and realistically we've got to consider what is the individual really wanting, and if it's just to gain a bit of muscle, that's probably much better done without this stuff, and if it's to become a Mr. Olympia, then that's the risk that you take when you do that.
100%.
Yeah, interesting. Dean, it's been fantastic speaking to you. Did you have any final thoughts or any other way that we can find you as well?
If people want to follow me on Instagram, my use is DEANSTM, and that's also my YouTube channel.
Cool.
So that's probably the best place where people can follow day-to-day content and, pick my brain. The other thing is I'm the educator on Jordan Peters and Corin Ingram's website, trainbyjp.com. So I'm on there daily, day before I'm there, where I, again, with the bullshit meter, tear apart things, or answer questions regarding functional medicine towards bodybuilding. And there's some video content there for myself also. So if people, I think it's $6.99 per month to join up on a subscription fee, but there's tons of videos, and like I said, there's a whole team of athletes and 2 other educators, Stephen and Peter, that also answer questions like myself in a non-biased scientific approach.
Fantastic. We'll put links to that in the show notes as well.
So yeah, it's been a pleasure.
It has been lovely, Dean. Thank you.
It's been a great chat. Thank you very much.
All right,
See ya.
speak soon.